We are here today because we have a humanitarian crisis on our southern border, now a refugee crisis, which I would argue requires an emergency response domestically and the urgent recalibration of our foreign policy. It is important that we address this refugee crisis. In my view, it is equally important that we don't rush to change the laws in a way that would strip these children of their rights to due process. In dealing with this crisis, it's imperative that we understand its root causes and why it's not about America putting out a welcome mat. It is about a desperate effort by desperate parents to do what any parent would do to protect their child from violence and the threat of death. We have with us two panels of experts who will help us fully understand the factors that have driven nearly 60,000 unaccompanied children in the past 9 months alone to flee their countries and refuge in the United States. This past weekend, in a piece in the New York Times by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Sonia Nazario, on our second panel today, she wrote about, among others, Christian Omar Reyes, a 6th grader. His father was murdered by gangs while working as a security guard. 3 people he knows were murdered this year. 4 others were on a corner near his house in the first 2 weeks of the year. A girl his age was beaten, a hole cut in her throat, her body left in a ravine across from his house. Christian said it's time to leave. Or Carlos Bacadano, a 14-year-old who worked in a dump picking scrap metal when he was a boy, making $1 or $2 a day. When he was 9 years old, he barely escaped 2 drug traffickers who wanted to rape him. When he was 10, the drug traffickers pressured him to try drugs and join a gang. He has known 8 people who were murdered, 3 killed in front of him. In one case, he watched as 2 hitmen brazenly shot 2 young brothers execution style. These stories are the tragic stories of life-changing experiences that too many children face in Central America every day. Tens of thousands of children like Christian and Carlos whose stories are unknown, but no less tragic. For me, as someone who has closely followed Latin America for decades, the current crisis in Central America is no less shocking than for anyone else, but it doesn't come as a complete surprise. At the end of the civil wars that raged Central America in the 1980s and 90s, we did not pay enough attention after the wars to the region. We did not remain sufficiently engaged with our Central American neighbors. We did not work closely enough with them to address the structural problems of social and economic development or the societal violence that is fueling today's crisis. I have complained strongly and argued forcefully that the years of cuts to the region would come at our own peril. Besides the deep poverty, we have enormous challenges in Central America, where we have the confluence of major drug trafficking as a via to the United States, where we have gangs that have dramatically increased in El Salvador from 600 to 40,000. Then, of course, human traffickers who take advantage of those set of circumstances. And the efforts that we failed to take end up now with the crisis on our southern border. Year after year, when we've reviewed budgets of this and past administrations, I have said that our constant cuts to Latin America and Central America come at a price. And unfortunately, in part, we are seeing that price today. So we're going to spend $3.4 billion to deal with the consequences of the causes in Central America, but we will deal, luckily, because we've only spent $110 million in 5 Central American countries, under this proposal with $300 million to deal with the core issues of citizen security, of combating the traffickers, of combating the drug cartels, of combating the gangs. 300 million, 3.4 billion. It would seem to me that at some point We will focus on the core problems so that we don't have the consequences in our country of the challenges, of the deep issues that are facing Central America as it relates to citizen security. One other point, although this hearing is about root causes and how we might deal with them, let me just take the moment in personal privilege of saying I oppose the changing of the existing law. There is a reason why that law was passed. It was passed to say that non-contiguous nations, if you're fleeing 2,000 miles to try to come to the United States, there may be a greater probability that you have a real case to be made for asylum because you have a credible fear of the loss of your life, which under our law, as I hear those who advocate for the rule of law, I agree, under our law is very clear. Now, if you flee 2,000 miles and you were told by the gangs, join or die, if you're raped and you flee 2,000 miles not to ever experience that tragic and traumatic set of circumstances, you don't come with anything but the clothing on your back. And when you get here to the United States, you're going to need a reasonable period of time to be able to produce the facts to make that case. That doesn't come with you. And so I understand the desire to accelerate the process, but accelerating without due process is not acceptable. I believe the law presently has a series of provisions in it that would give the administration the wherewithal to accelerate, but with due process. So I support the efforts for the resources that are necessary to meet the challenge. But by the same token, those who just have a different view about what this law was intended to do, which passed with broad bipartisan support in both houses of the Congress and signed by a Republican president, is not something that I personally can accept. Finally, I hope we'll hear our panelists' views on the root causes of the problem more broadly, the short and long-term strategies that will strengthen governance and the rule of law in these countries, restore public confidence in the effective justice systems and civilian police forces that dismantles the human smuggling networks bringing these children to our border, making sure that children and families deported from the United States, and there will be many under the existing law who will be deported, who will not have proven a credible case, receive sufficient attention and support when they arrive home, and how we can lay a strong foundation so that we can have citizen security in Central America, so that we will not face the consequences and they will face a more prosperous future.